Welcome to the AI Standard Stack with me, Michael Mainelli, Director at Zien Group.
And me, Adam Smith, Chair of the AIQI Consortium.
Each episode on AI Standards Stack, we discuss developments in AI assurance with guests from around the world that are leading the charge on the standards, ethics, and regulation of AI.
This week on the show, we have as our guest Maury Shenk, entrepreneur, lawyer, investor, and most recently founder of Ordinary Wisdom. Maury will be considering whether AI can hold a worldview, be trained to have a conscience, or be relied upon to act sensibly.
Well, let's talk to Maury. Maury, you're here to tell us about the project, but also to share with us many reflections on AI and ethics that you've accumulated over the years. So really, just to get things going, Maury, our audience understands you. Could you tell us a little bit more about your journey into AI and AI ethics in particular?
Well, I started my career a number of years ago as a technology lawyer. I was managing partner of the London office of a U.S. law firm after starting in the U.S., as you can hear from the accent, and liked the law firm, but liked doing a wider variety of other things. And so for the last 15 plus years, I've been on a journey where I've founded a couple of companies, worked in private equity, had quite a few directorships, and been an investor myself. And in AI, first an investor in AI, and just got very interested in it technically. So Ordinary Wisdom is the second AI-related company I've founded, and I just find it to be the most fascinating topic of my lifetime, and I'm pressing forward with it.
Well, could you tell us a little bit about the ethics that you've encountered in AI over that period?
So I've approached ethics from a risk perspective. I've got some background in risk analysis and thinking about the problems that could be caused by AI. And my general perspective has been that there are a large number of problems that could result from AI, and each of those may have a different approach to them. So we worry about autonomous weapons. The issues to deal with AI-driven autonomous weapons are different from those for AI bias. Some of those are ethical issues. Bias, I think people think of as closer to an ethical issue. And so that's my perspective, is that we think about the risks from these different potential harms and apply solutions if we can.
And Adam, AIQI has constantly come. In fact, it began with a set of people looking at both standards and ISO 42001, but also the ethics of introducing new technologies, and sort of broadly settled around the concepts of principalism. But how do you view AI ethics at AIQI?
So I think answering first from a standards point of view, I think ethics is challenging because even if you take a group of AI ethicists from the same country, there are multiple ethical models that they will use. There is no clear way to kind of standardize ethics. So standards tend to talk about things like societal concerns and ethical values in fairly broad brush terms. I think one of the things we've done in international standards is focus more on this concept of trustworthiness. What does it take to make people trust a system? But even that can sometimes be a little bit difficult to draw a box around. So I think within AIQI, we're working off that standards basis. And I think where a lot of the direction is going now is, like Maury said, is focused more on the risks, whether that is risks to the user of the AI or wider societal risks. And that has led to a focus on safety, which is an interesting dimension. And a lot of the conversations that have been had in standards have been starting to focus more on that concept of safety. But this, of course, has some geopolitical considerations, as a lot of the AI safety institutes are now renaming themselves as AI security institutes. So it can be a little bit difficult to pin down what people mean by ethics, trustworthiness, and safety. But when you actually go a level lower to the technical level, they're talking about bias, they're talking about robustness, they're talking about exactly the same technical issues. So within AIQI, we focus on that technical level.
Well, I must say, to me, the ISO area has tried to deal with philosophy and ethics in the past. But the standards on that are, well, very poor, actually. They're sort of a badly regurgitated undergraduate statement of utilitarianism and virtue ethics. So there's a long way to go there. I mean, we encountered this at the British Computer Society some 20 years ago, and we created a methodology called Diode. And Diode was based, as I said earlier, on principalism. Principalism really asserts four things. It says that one, you need to respect the autonomy of the people you're making decisions about. Two, beneficence, you must be trying to do good. Non-maleficence, in doing good, you're not trying to do harm to, say, a particular subgroup. And finally, justice doesn't make sense. And that grew out of the medical ethics arena, principally in the 60s. The way I used to characterize it was we asked the Greek philosophers 2,700 years ago for some answers to some questions, and they're still coming back to us. And doctors needed to make decisions on things like vaccines. So, autonomy. Well, obviously the vaccine is your choice. Well, unless you're under 16 or you're got dementia in an old folks home or you're in the army. Obviously, we mean to do good. Yeah, but doesn't your vaccine also kill a few people out of every million? Obviously, we're not trying to be maleficent, yes, but doesn't this harm some minority group or something like that? And finally, justice. How much does your vaccine cost? Oh, it's only $500,000 a pop. Wait a minute. Well, with $500,000 a person, I could do a lot more things out there. And I think that actually encompasses. We looked at this in particular in areas like explicability, which is another thing that comes up in AI ethics. And the team pretty much concluded that that falls very strongly under autonomy. So the system explained to you at a level that you can make your own decision. So I think there's a lot in this. And sometimes I've noticed a lot of the AI ethicists sort of almost making up principles of their own because they're related to AI without trying to think, are there some more general ethical principles out there? Anyway, Maury, you've told us a little bit about your path, but uh, just before we move into ordinary AI, we'd be kind of curious about how you see AI affecting society, not the business and that kind of society over the coming years, and why would that have an ethical dimension?
Well, we started off talking about risks and harms, but I'm overall an optimist about AI. I think first, I think the effect on society is going to be rather large. I mean, we're in a bit of a bubble now, so people say, well, maybe it's been exaggerated, but I think I'm not sure who it was said people overestimate the impact within the next couple of years, but underestimate over the next 10 years plus. I
Yeah,
think the
that's Ray
effects,
Amara. Ray Amara. It's often attributed to Bill Gates, but it was Ray Amara, who was a U.S. Scientist in the 50s. Yeah.
and I think it's going to have a huge effect across all sectors. I think it's a general purpose technology like fire or electricity or digital computation that can be applied across sectors. And in particular, when you think about human progress, um, humans have made progress, particularly in recent centuries, where it hadn't been possible for before, largely off the back of intelligence. The printing press, we can share ideas, we can share intelligence, we build this ladder of intelligence. And the idea that we are um, making intelligences, and that's intelligences that could be replicable at scale. That's a very powerful capability, which we're already starting to see. There's been some tremendous achievements like AlphaFold for proteins, easy machine translation. It's like the Babelfish in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy already. And LLMs, which have their problems, but they've sort of solved, they've bested the Turing test, solved the problem of human language as a computer interface. It's really quite impressive. I think these are going to be the early achievements of what we see, and that there will be broader, much broader things over the remainder of my lifetime and for the coming centuries.
Mm. Well, even when AI was conceptual in the 1940s, because it was in the late 1940s that Isaac Asimov looked at his three laws of robotics. And just for the sake of the podcast, I'll remind people, the first law is you cannot harm humans or allow inaction causing harm, must obey humans, and must protect itself unless it conflicts with law one or two. So he had a sequence there and developed the story. In the course of developing that story, of course, he created something which is often referred to as the zeroth law, which is robots cannot harm humanity or allow inaction harming humanity. And that zeroth law to me equates to a lot of the furore, particularly in 2023 when we had the Bletchley Park incident. We have this kind of whole group of existentialist ethics almost, which is one bit, and then we move kind of into the practical bit, assuming we're still alive. You know, is the AI going to act ethically? So you've got ordinary wisdom, which is what, not even a month old, or a bit over a month old, but you believe that you've come up with an approach, a solution that might make AI behave in a sensible way for humans. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, well, I think it's part of the solution. A lot of people are working on AI, obviously, but we think, and I'm extremely pleased to have you involved in it, Michael, as you noted. The idea behind ordinary wisdom is we can use human intelligence to give AI a selected worldview or a conscience, if you will, so that the approach of the AI is not the one that Sam Altman and his crew at OpenAI or Elon Musk and Grok decide for you, but that through social consensus or an approach that you yourself could choose, you could give AI a worldview. And we're going to put a robust, state-of-the-art technical foundation that uses the latest advances in AI that allows that to happen. And it could be for an individual, for a group. At least in the early days, we're not going to try to choose what a right worldview is. I don't believe that I know for the world. But you and I have had some conversations and this is a standards podcast, so maybe there is a role ultimately for standardizing certain approaches to alignment, to worldview.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the techniques of this? I mean, it sounds great, but I mean, how do you go about this?
Well, I don't want to reveal too much because we're building our proof of concept right now, but there are well-established technical methods. This is my second AI company, and one of my theses building the first one, which is in the ed tech space, was that the tech is going to keep advancing to enable what we're doing. And that's going to keep happening. So we'll use whatever the state of the art is. And the state of the art is good enough to do this already. There are techniques like fine tuning, RAG, reinforcement learning is not yet there, but we think we can work with it. And we've got some excellent technical advisors and are continuing the conversation. We think there's no question that you can do this. I'm not going to say right now exactly how we're going to do it because I'm on a podcast. We're not quite in stealth mode, but we're not planning for a few months to reveal the exact approach to what we're doing.
Well, you used a word that is ambiguous and subject to a little bit of discussion in most circles, conscience. And Adam, you use the word trust and trustworthiness. And I tend to be a bit sensitive, oddly, to both of those. So very strangely, this week, I've been swapping notes with people on Honora O'Neill's work on trustworthiness itself. And I've long said I don't like the word trust. I like the concept of the phrase appropriate reliance. So am I relying on something to the correct degree? But these are good discussions to have. What did you mean by conscience, Maury?
Well, conscience you could describe as doing the right thing when nobody's looking. But I think and maybe you were alluding to this, the hard thing about conscience is we do this as thinking human beings, and that raises the issues of are AIs conscious? I personally don't believe they're conscious. I believe that they're a set of machine processes. But I actually don't believe it matters for the purpose of what we're doing, of whether AIs are conscious or not. There's the whole solipsism problem. Do I know that you're conscious, Michael? No, I believe you are. I don't believe an AI is conscious. But what matters is that I believe you're conscious, or in the case of the AI, that it acts in many cases as if it's conscious. We're creating these quasi-intelligences that are out there that are performing human-like roles. And I think the fact that they act as if they're conscious, we need alignment. And so I think that the conscience is important. It's like doing the right thing. It's related to an alignment. It evokes consciousness, which I think is an interesting debate, but isn't very important to what we're doing.
Adam, I know you've got quite a few views on consciousness.
Yeah, it sounds like we could spend hours trying to define consciousness and then hours arguing about whether AI was indeed conscious. And I agree, those aren't the important debates. You know, as I sort of alluded to before, when I talk about AI, I'd rather look at something like an LLM and talk about how it's doing answering questions based on a corpus of text or summarizing text, the real technical tasks that it's doing. The closer we get to anthropomorphism, the harder I find it is to make progress on anything related to the state of the art. Just a question on the worldview that you want to inject in the AI. Now, I understand you said not one worldview, but you know, there's a lot of views in the world. There's a lot of different cultural traditions with competing values. And is your approach going to ultimately focus in on a particular set of values, or are you going to try and integrate all of those worldviews? And if you're going to try and integrate all of them, how are you going to measure success? Because I imagine the AI would get quite lost.
Well, thank you for these are important aspects of what we're doing. Um, I think there's at least three questions there. One is, are we going to try to choose particular worldviews? And I think maybe ultimately, but not initially. Initially, what we're going to try to do is create a pipeline that, in a way that I'm not going to say today because it's going to be a reveal a few months down the road, different entities or individuals will be able to choose a worldview. It could be their worldview. And it might be, you might choose to have an LLM that says things that other people won't like, but we already have that problem with humans sometimes say things we don't like, so it will be a wide variety. In terms of evaluating the worldviews, a key element of what we're going to be doing will be designing tests for AI responses. And getting back to the first point of are we going to select a worldview? It's not going to be about having a right answer to the tests. It's going to be about being able to observe the answer to the tests. And so when you've given an LLM a particular worldview or attempted to do so, uh, then how does it respond to this large suite of tests we will have? And people will be able to observe that. We may ultimately have standards for that, but it's worldview and testing it are key elements of what we're doing.
Hmm. Well, AI quality infrastructure is a quality infrastructure and standards organization. And Maury, you made a comment in passing that it might, where you're headed, might lead to some types of standards. But standards do need measurement and evaluation, and somebody's got to kind of make up their mind. How do you see ordinary wisdom perhaps contributing to standards, and what kind of standards would they be that aren't already covered in the AIQI type stable?
So both of you know a lot more about standards than I do. And Michael, one of the reasons why it's good to have you involved in our project is because of that knowledge. So I may be ignorant about certain standards. Probably the leading standard for AI is ISO 42001, and that's a process standard. I think the standards we're talking about here are potentially substantive standards for how an AI should behave in 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 alignment. And as I said in response to Adam's question, we're not planning to go there initially, but longer run, we could see having standards for certain types of AI responses, actions that are widely acceptable to society, even if not everybody agrees, that are widely acceptable for purposes of alignment. So, companies like Anthropic has its constitution about how AI should behave, how the Claude behaves according to Anthropic's constitution. You could theoretically have a standard that's the equivalent of the Anthropic Constitution for LLM behavior, but have it be a widely agreed standard, perhaps with some options as to behavior, rather than one that's chosen by a company. And I respect Anthropic, but we might not all agree with their approach.
Adam, you were going to kick
One
in.
thought on this. So, first of all, can I draw a parallel with social media? Because in sort of newer social media networks, they're trending towards decentralization. i.e., not having a central server, central company managing the social media network. And one of those networks has federated moderation. So when you set up your social media profile, you can choose and later change what type of moderation you want. And it's a separate organization that does the moderation. So you can choose based on your political views or your appetite for risk and things, what kind of moderation you want on your feed. And that's kind of similar, right? It's different, but it's similar. And one of the things
I like the analogy.
One of the things that's driven that is the interoperability. And that's something standards do really well, is interoperability between different stakeholders and systems and things like that. So in a few years, when this idea is more real, I can easily see the need for an interoperability standard to be able to have different worldviews imported from different stakeholders and things like
Hmm.
I love that idea. That's I'm going to steal it if you don't mind, Adam.
Sure.
Maury, I mean, you mentioned behavior, and I'm probably going to make Adam wince, and I'm not trying to, but if I can't tell the difference in many cases between an AI, spitting out some text and a human spitting out some text, would your standards of behavior also apply to humans?
That's a great question. I think the answer is yes. I mean, I'm not sure that we would want to have most people in the world wouldn't say their behavior must be regulated by a standard, although I'm a lawyer by background, we could say our legal systems are a form of standard. But if what we're looking for is alignment, and okay, AIs as of yet aren't embodied, so although lots of robots are coming along, so their scope of behavior is rather different from the scope of a human, but the scope of human behavior. But in general, if we want alignment, we would expect similar standards to apply to AI and human behavior.
Well, you also said something earlier, I think, to paraphrase, it was sort of consciences when you behave well when nobody else is looking. Um, how are AIs behaving when people are looking, and how does that differ from when people are not looking? Um, and how back to Adam's question, but in a slightly different way, how might you measure that?
Well, I mean, people are. Well, I think it's these tests that I was talking about, and that's a key part of our initiative, which we have a plan for, but we have to do it. And we're working with the Royal Institute of Philosophy, who we hope will contribute some philosophical tests. We're working with some universities who have some, humanities types. They have some technical types. We're going to source these from various places. So I don't know the specific answer, but in broad brushes, looking at these tests to look at how AIs are performing.
Hmm. And you mentioned a kind of a risk-based approach, and that your whole attitude towards AI has been about risk. And what specific risks will ordinary wisdom help control?
Hmm. I haven't seen this as a specific risk management um, project, and maybe I should. I see it as an alignment project. But I think in the course of alignment, we would hope to address these risks. And diving into the specifics, I mean, there are many risks. I started an effort myself for a year or so to try to categorize them and then decided other people were doing it better. The MIT AI Risk Initiative, which I've participated in as an expert, I think does probably the best job of it. But at a high level, the ones I worry about are not the ones that have attracted the most attention. The whole AI apocalypse risk that you referred to, Michael, that received a lot of attention around the Bletchley time, I think is a bit of I mean, we should pay attention to it, but I think it's a lot of the scenarios are a bit of a fairy tale. The whole US-China competition thing, US and China are in competition, but I don't see one or the other winning and taking over the world as a result. And somewhat controversial bias attracts a lot of attention. I personally don't think bias is the biggest risk with AI. AI is biased because humans are biased and the data are biased. But I don't think AI is more biased than humans. The risks that I actually worry the most about at the moment are uh, disruption, geopolitical disruption from autonomous warfare. And I actually have a role as the director of Anduril UK. Anduril's a big player in this. So, I'm involved in autonomous warfare to some extent, but I believe that because it's happening, we need to have a deterrent in the space as well. I think there's a very large risk. I think a core principle of Anduril is peace through strength. And the other one that I think is a huge risk is social disruption. AI is starting to distract us, just like social media has created, we believe, some filter bubbles. I think dealing with these non-human intelligences extensively can create really significant problems. And we're starting to understand that people with um, mental issues can be driven into suicide by AIs or psychosis. I think that those are the risks that I worry about. But these are more opinions. It's not the core mission of ordinary wisdom to solve these problems, although I think some solutions will come out of better alignment.
Mm, very good. And what you said, this was more about alignment than risk reduction. Do you want to tease that out a little bit?
Well, um, the idea, I'll take it back to a worldview. The idea is to be able to give the AI a worldview. And uh, we're in a very early stage. So I don't want to go too deep into saying what that worldview could be. I want us to enable creating LLMs and other AI models with a wide variety of worldviews. I think there will be consequences in terms of risk, but the problem of giving a worldview is a meaty enough problem not to try. I don't want to try to solve the world.
Adam, as
Just
kind of a standards expert, you know the problem you have that people come up with sort of a standard, and you spoke earlier about interoperability. We would easily speak about risk reduction, the purposes of standards. Now they do it. How does this strike you?
so I was just thinking there. So one of the things that there's an increasing focus on in standards is human and machine teaming. And when we were talking before, we were very much talking about humans and AI as separate entities. And Murray, I'm sure you know from looking at autonomous warfare, there's obviously quite a lot of interaction going on between humans and AI, and even down to factories where there are robots that help people lift boxes and things like that. And I
Mhm.
think increasingly we will need to think about not just aligning AI with human worldviews, but aligning a human and AI and an AI that are working together to achieve a common goal. And I think that puts a slightly different spin on alignment and a slightly different spin on what you're talking about with ordinary wisdom. It's very interesting.
I agree, Adam. Again, something that I have not focused too much on that cooperate. I think you're talking about cooperation between
Mm,
humans and AIs, which I think is an important dimension of this, which we haven't focused on very much, and gets back to my previous response that there are so many dimensions of having an
mm.
AI behave in a particular way that I don't yet want to say I'm solving particular dimensions of it.
Mm. Well, the intriguing thing to me in this space about conscious, I mean, I'm finding it fascinating to delve into it. Is this alignment problem? But one of the things that becomes intriguing, we had an event yesterday at Lloyd's, and I was speaking on, the application of this all in the insurance markets. And I found it surprising that many of the people in there were planning to use AI for calculative, quantitative tasks, which it's not particularly good.
No.
And this I refer to it frequently as the pixie dust, and it was kind of, well, we've got all these problems in the market, and then we'll throw the pixie dust on it. And the analogy I drew for those of you who know your economic history was the great retrocession spiral in the 1980s in Lloyd's, which led to effectively the collapse of the market in the early 90s. And that was broadly that people would come to the end of their terms and take the runoff insurance and then hand that to a retrocession entity, which is fine. It's a normal thing in the market. But the problem was that in Lloyd's, it was going back into the Lloyd's market. So the Lloyd's market was insuring itself against its own risks, and this is what was called the spiral, and led to the formation of something called Equitat, I think in 1992 from memory. So it was a real disaster. And I was listening to them yesterday about how they were going to cooperate on sharing data, et cetera. I was just wondering if we are going to have like a retrocession data spiral, and they were all kind of shocked about this. The shock is at a different level for me, though. It's about the people not understanding what AI is good at and what it's bad at. Adam, you said earlier, it's good at summarizing text and spitting out some text based on a bunch of other text, which is great. That's what it's there to do. But that is miles away from quantitative applications. And yet, the senior people don't understand what's going on. They ask the junior people, go away and build me some AI wizzo thingo thingamy. And it's like boss said he wanted to use AI. I wouldn't do it, but what the heck if that's what he wants. And so, how do you see that kind of alignment?
Well, I'm not sure that's the kind of alignment I'm talking about, Michael, but I think it's very close to the core of the problem with AI practically, that people need to know what it can do and what it can't do. I mean, there's lots of mistakes about that going on. I think an important dimension is we're all excited about LLMs and generative AI, but there are some applications, the predictive AI, which has been mature for much longer than generative AI, can do some quantitative like tasks. So the fact that AlphaFold can recognize protein structures is interesting. So where it's a task that involves some pattern recognition, I think I read recently that hurricane tracks are being better forecast, but with AI models than traditional climate models. So I think you have to look very specifically at the task and the tools that you have available and say, what's the right tool? Is there a tool that can do this? Or is it somewhere the AI just isn't suited and might produce a problem like you mentioned?
And kind of a final question for me. I'm sure Adam will have one or two more, but you mentioned earlier, and we were at the autonomous defense issues. We were at an event together, Maury, last month, and we had some people from the defense sector asserting that there would always be a human in the loop. No decision of any consequence would be made without reference to a human. And yet we have real cases in Gaza and elsewhere where people who've been given a human in the loop role basically abrogate it and just say yes, yes, yes to everything that comes up. And humans are notoriously lazy. and further, if I say no, I've then got to justify the whole thing. So isn't it easier just to say the AI told me so, which would bear many many analogies to World War II. So how do we align humans with AI without squeezing the human out or making the human really just basically as an automatic stamping engine?
Well, first of all, I'd say I think the fear that with autonomous weapons we will not have humans in the loop is a real one. Like you said, it's already happening and it's dangerous. We have to I mean, that's a problem with, will the AI have the right capabilities to do what we intend it to do and not have unforeseen consequences? I don't have a good answer, unfortunately, to how in that complex scenario of war, of warfare, how we get that right. I think that's why I'm concerned about it, is because a it's such a complex, destabilizing situation where people are pushing for advantage and trying things out. And there's a real human cost. Obviously, you're trying to kill people. So I don't have a good answer to that, but I think seeking such answers, both from a big AI, an alignment perspective like what we're doing with ordinary wisdom, or a technical perspective like my colleagues at Anduril are doing, is an important thing to do.
Adam, just more probably help our listeners to have a feel for you. You spoke about a reveal coming up, and this whole project sounds very promising and interesting, and certainly attracted my attention. But can you give the listeners a bit more detail on maybe, if not exactly quite what you intend to do, but at least what they can look forward to over the next few months?
So we are building um, a demonstration pipeline of how AIs can be given a selected worldview. And we're hoping to have that ready by sometime in February. It's not going to be the full thing, but it's going to show how it works. It will work, I'm confident. And at the same time, we're going to tell people how we're going to select the materials and the tests, et cetera, for alignment. That's where what I'm not going to tell you today. That's part of the clever secret sauce of what we're doing. So sometime in February, hopefully with you, Michael, involved, we'll do an announcement to the world of what we're going to do, and then have it hit the world and start seeing how it works.
Well, if on behalf of Adam and me, may I thank you, Maury, for sharing your thoughts on Ordinary Wisdom. It's a it's a great title. It sounds like an interesting project, and I'm looking forward to a lot more of the reveal coming out for the users. But please do that. Can we thank you for appearing on what has been our first episode of the AI Standards Stack? And we really appreciate your time and your contribution.
I'm deeply honored to be your first guest.